Wait, okay, so God loved the world, but tells us not to. Is that right? Hey, I am so glad you joined us this week. As we dive into our text in John chapter 15, we remember that this is after the Last Supper. This is part of what is known as Jesus' farewell discourse. He's preparing them for the storm that's about to hit. A storm they never imagined. In chapter 14, he promised he was going to prepare a place for them, going to prepare a place for his disciples, that he would come back for them. And in the meantime, he would not leave them alone. In John 14:26, he says this, he says, "But the Helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, he will teach you all things and bring to your remembrance all that I have said to you." Then chapter 15 starts with Jesus assuring them that if they stay connected to him, like branches are to a vine, if you remember and allow his words to live in you, you will be fruitful and God will answer your prayers. Then he talks about his love for them, that the greatest expression of love is to lay down your life for your friends. And he also told them that they are no longer called servants, but friends. So in this farewell discourse, he's giving them the things to know and the things to remember. He's giving them a bit of, I guess, what we could call ministry theory. See, because theory answers the question, why? As a young minister, I remember Pastor Chuck sitting us down and teaching us some of the whys of ministry practices. And that's whys, W-H-Y, not wise, W-I-S-E, although the whys are wise. And so it was really about us understand the why of what we were doing and not just the what. Because if you only have the what, then you can't have the end goal in mind. So if circumstances change, all you know is what you have been doing and not what you were actually trying to accomplish. It reminds me of the story of the young married wife who had the whole family over for dinner, and she was making a roast. So she got out 2 pans and she put the roast in one. Then she cut about 3 inches off of the end of the roast and put it in the other pan. And her grandmother asked her, "Why are you doing it like that?" And the granddaughter answered, "Well, this is how Mom taught me to do it." So the grandmother called her daughter into the kitchen. And the granddaughter asked her mom, "Mom, why do we cut the end off the roast and put it in a separate pan?" And the mom answered, "Well, that's how your grandmother taught me to do it." And then the grandmother started to laugh. And she said, "Well, we used to cut the end off of the roast because we only had small pans." See, that's a great story. But let me ask you this. Whose fault is it that the granddaughter didn't clearly understand the theory of making a roast? See, she learned the steps to follow, but not the purpose of the steps. Well, I guess in my mind, there's enough blame to go around because Grandma probably never said, "Since we only have a short pan and the roast doesn't fit, we cut the end off and put it into another pan. She probably just told her daughter, cut about 3 inches off the end of that roast and put the big piece in that pan and put the small piece in the other pan. And her daughter taught her daughter the same exact thing. So the granddaughter, who had a pan that was plenty big enough for the entire roast, was taking extra time and steps that really weren't beneficial. You know, when I was a young minister, as Pastor Chuck taught us to conduct funeral services, he taught us the whys, the theories behind the things we were doing. You know, at Loveland and at many other churches, you may have seen ministers prepare for the parting view of the remains at a funeral of the deceased person while the congregation is still seated. The ministers will come up and view first. If there are multiple ministers, they'll stand usually in equal numbers at the ends of the casket, by the head and by the foot. And they'll attempt to be a warm and friendly face, and yet at the same time serious. The senior minister, or the minister with the closest relationship to the family, will often be the one that stands right near the head of the casket. And as people file by the ministers, it's not a time for the clergy to quietly joke or be light, because they are setting the tone for the moment. Someone is in pain and someone is mourning, and this is a time to make sure that not only you respect it, but that you're setting the example that other people would respect it as well. The purpose of standing at each end of the casket is so that the people viewing see a strong, warm, and affirming life all around the remains of their loved one. The minister near the head of the casket is to make sure those grieving most that they would immediately see and feel the encouragement of someone that they respect and trust. See, without that explanation, you and many ministers standing up there are just cutting the end of the roast off. See, and Jesus wanted his disciples, and by extension, us, to understand as much of the moment as they could. But even then, the chaos of the arrest, the trials, the beating, the crucifixion, the death of their leader, that was going to send most of Jesus' followers scurrying for cover. Look at what Jesus said in the first 2 verses of John chapter 16. Look at verse 1. I have said all these things to you to keep you from falling away. They will put you out of synagogues. Indeed, the hour is coming when whoever kills you will think he is offering service to God. Wow. Look, that's comforting, isn't it? But they will sincerely think that you are enemies of God, and by killing you, they're doing the right thing. See, this explains why Jesus' very first words while he was hanging on the cross were, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. See, they don't understand. The picture makes no sense to them. See, most would think that if Jesus and his followers were good guys, all of the leaders, the religious leaders and the governmental leaders wouldn't hate him, right? Well, let's see what Jesus says, starting in verse 18 of John 15. John 15:18. It reads like this. If the world hates you, know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love you as its own. But because you are not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a servant is not greater than his master? If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will also keep yours. But all these things they will do to you on account of my name, because they do not know him who sent me. If I had not come and spoken to them, they would not have been guilty of sin. But now they have no excuse for their sin. Whoever hates me hates my Father also. If I had not done among them the works that no one else did, they would not be guilty of sin. But now they have seen and hated both me and my Father. But the word that is written in their law must be fulfilled. They hated me without a cause. But when the Helper comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, the Spirit of truth, who proceeds from the Father, he will bear witness about me. And you also will bear witness, because you have been with me from the beginning. Wow. Notice the first word of verse 15. It says, if. See, that word seems to imply that the world may or may not hate you. You know, there are believers and there are churches that the world doesn't hate. And some would say it's because they compromise. They sugarcoat the gospel. They are like the world. That's why the world doesn't hate them. So it's important that we get an understanding of what Jesus is talking about when he uses the word world. In the Bible, particularly the New Testament, the word world can have at least three different meanings. It's usually the Greek word cosmos, which means an orderly arrangement. But like some words, the context which is used is really important. There's at least three ways that word can be interpreted when we're talking about Bible study. And in Bible study, there's this big word. It's called hermeneutics. You know, almost 25 years ago, I started a class at Loveland called Herman Who, and it's hermeneutics. And it's a term that's named after the Greek god Hermes, who was supposed to be Zeus's messenger. His job was to clearly and correctly relay Zeus's messages to other gods. And he also brought messages from the gods to mortals. So hermeneutics teaches the basic principles and rules of clear and correct Bible interpretation. It's about getting the right message through. After I taught the very first set of classes, Pastor Willie Lewis took it over and taught most of our ministers and leaders. He did an amazing job. He took that hermeneutics class farther than I ever would have. But hermeneutics teaches that there is a science to interpretation, meaning a standard that this is always this. because the scientific method, you all know this, the scientific method is provable and repeatable. But in language, interpretation also is an art. There are moments when you have to feel the meaning based on the situation, the context, and the people communicating. Let's look at John 3:16, because it tells us, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." Okay, wait a minute. All right, so God loved the world. But doesn't 1 John chapter 2, right around verse 15, does it tell us, do not love the world or the things in the world? If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Wait, okay, so God loved the world, but tells us not to. Is that right? Well, not really. Because the word world, particularly in the New Testament, again, I said it before, it can mean at least three things, depending on the context. So world can mean the earth itself. World can mean the people in the world. And world can also mean the humanistic systems and values that exist. So in John 3, world would be interpreted the people of this world. So for God so loved the people that he gave his only begotten Son. And in 1 John chapter 2, the world would be interpreted as the humanistic systems and values of the world that are not consistent with God's love and principles of his word. So in context, when we look here at John chapter 15, based on what Jesus is saying, it is the systems and the values of God's kingdom and his people that the world will hate. And again, by extension, the expression of that hate will be directed at you, his followers. They will hate you because you don't operate in their system. We, as Jesus followers, we don't embrace those values. That's why Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12 says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in heavenly places." You see, there's an overarching system that we don't go along with. But see, now I want to remind you that all the people of the world didn't always hate Jesus. Now, remember, the people who weren't like Jesus liked Jesus. If you're a Bible reader, you can probably think about the people of the world that Jesus interacted with, and they were curious about him, and they wanted to interact with him. He wasn't anything like them, and they weren't anything like him, but for some reason, they liked him. The people who were supposed to be the most like Jesus didn't like Jesus. The people who were supposed to be committed to the scriptures, the people that were supposed to be God's people, the people who were to be watching for the coming of the Messiah, the ones considered religious, didn't like him because he was removing power from their positions and their institutions. He had damaged their ability to be self-righteous and to rule over the common people with religious superiority. You see, religion is a humanistic attempt to reach God. See, the reason that Christians think that we're different than religion is because the story of the Bible is about man, as much as he tried, had no ability to connect or reconnect with God. So God had to do it all. Yeah. So the ground is level at the cross. There are no big I's and little U's at the cross. We are all broken people. We have all, as Romans tells us, sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. And because of that sin, we know that the wages of sin is death. But the gift of God is eternal life. So we get to be God's people because it's a gift. Not because we earned it, not because we figured it out, not because we did all the right things, we crossed the T's and dotted the I's, not because we gave the right amount of money, not because we joined the right church group, not because our parents were believers, not because of any of that. It's because God spoke into our heart and we recognized our need for Him. And we said, God, I don't know how to do this on my own. I don't know how to know you. I don't know how to get to you, but I trust that through Jesus, you took care of that for me. So Lord, I recognize that I've sinned. I've fallen short of what you created me to be. And I'm sorry. Would you forgive me and bring me into a relationship with you that shows me how to live, shows me how to love you with all of my heart, and shows me how to love my neighbor as myself? See, the people and the churches that the world doesn't hate, it could be because they're compromising, but it also could be because they've figured out how to be like Jesus was, and where John chapter 1 says that he was full of grace and truth. So that I don't have to be just grace, and I don't just have to be truth, that I can be fully both of them at the same time. And there's a few people, there's a few churches that have figured out how to do that on a regular basis. Now, as we get further into this, we'll see that as good at it as they are, it's not going to last forever. Because even Jesus, remember what he said in verse 18, they hated me first. So they loved Jesus, and then they turned on Jesus, and they will love some of us, and they're gonna turn on some of us. But some of those churches have learned to have tactful relationships, tactful conversations, like we see Jesus having with unbelievers, like we see Paul having when he's at the Areopagus in Acts chapter 16 and 17. Because too many of us are abrasive when we don't need to be. The gospel is offensive by nature. The gospel is offensive all by itself, because at its heart, the message is, you're not good enough to go to heaven. You on your own can never be good enough. You can try as hard as you want. You've already been disqualified because you've already sinned. You've already sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But for those of you who think offensive Christianity is a prerequisite, don't worry. Because Jesus's if seems to go away by the end of verse 19. Look at what he says. But I chose you out of the world. Yep. Therefore, the world hates you. It's not if the world anymore. Now he's saying the world hates you. Who was he talking to? He was talking to his disciples. And again, by extension, he's talking to us. We make a deliberate choice not to operate by the world's values. We extend grace to people. Grace meaning, grace being unmerited favor. We love on people. And not only when they don't do anything to hurt us, but also when they don't do anything to earn our love. And also when they do the opposite, when they really deserve our wrath. See, the world system hates that. It doesn't understand that. It likes things to be measured out evenly or in what their mind is justly. Why? Because the world teaches us to protect ourselves at all costs. See, in the culture we live in now, the highest value is safety and security. In God's kingdom, the highest value is love. Now, how that love is expressed can look different based on the context. See, we believe in service to others and generosity. We believe in that more than we believe in the accumulation of stuff. See, God isn't calling us all to make vows of poverty like he did Mother Teresa, but he called us to share the resources that we've been blessed to acquire, to be rivers where blessings flow through us, not ponds where they all accumulate for our own benefit. See, remember that a wise man, a good man, leaves an inheritance for his children's children. See, generational wealth is important, but not just money. You know, I love hearing Edna Boyd talk about the conversations that Deacon Richard Boyd had with his grandson. Their grandson is a professional football player, and being a professional football player, he's made a lot of money. And he will make a lot more. But his grandfather, while he was young, had talks with him about how to think about and how to handle money. See, he could spend his money on houses and cars and jewelry and women and wine and song. You can spend it, or you can invest it. You know, Deacon Boyd has gone on to heaven, but what he has given his grandson lives on. You see, that is an inheritance. And when I'm talking about investing, I'm not talking about, or I should say, I'm not only talking about real estate, stocks and bonds and crypto and all of those types of investments. And they're important. But also what Matthew 6 calls laying up treasures in heaven is important. See, what you invest in, helping and serving others, and I can see the look on some of your faces. Look, I'm not helping those homeless, those crazy, those lazy, those drug addicted. Okay, well, first I probably want to check your heart. But look, everyone doesn't have to help everything. But our challenge as Jesus followers is to be generous. You see, that's contrary to the world's value system. And I know to suggest that, some are going to go, oh, bah, humbug, Scrooge. Bah, humbug. How dare you say I should give away what I worked for? And I would just say this. Generosity is a grateful response. You see, when you experience God's love and forgiveness, you also give it away. When you look at your resources as blessings that come from more than just your hard work, see, when you look at it that way, then you want to bless others. Loveland and most churches that I know give away their resources. This Bible study, Sunday worship services in a building with technical people and musicians and singers and heat and air conditioning, with strong, good, life-impacting teaching, children's ministry, food pantries, all of those things. You know what? They all cost money. And yet we don't charge a penny for the people who receive them. Why? Because God's people are generous. You see, Jesus was preparing his followers to live in this world while not being of this world. And when this world sees that, they don't understand it. It rubs them the wrong way. They see you walking against traffic and they think, man, something's really wrong with that guy. Jesus is telling his disciples, you have to be ready to handle that. Remember what we read in John 16:1? I have said all these things to you to keep you from falling away. See you next week.